All right, so World War One is also definitely a piece of this. Germany had to pay reparations to France and Great Britain, and Germany actually ends up borrowing the money from the United States. They go to the United States banks and they ask for the money, and obviously the banks are in business to lend money out. If they lend money, they get paid back with interest, and that's what makes them money. And who better to lend money to than a government, right? Governments don't go bankrupt. Governments have money. They're always going to have a way to get money. So let's get it from Germany, and let's lend our money to Germany. And then when we get paid back, we'll make all sorts of money. And that was the idea by the banks here in the United States. So the United States banks send the money off to Germany. Germany pays France, Great Britain. Of course, France, Great Britain owed money to the United States at the end of World War One for the help that we had given them in the war. With supplies and other things like that they needed against Germany. And so they were paying back the United States with the money that they gotten from the reparations. So if you think about it, the United States was paid with money that was borrowed from the United States. Of course, when the Great Depression hits, places like Germany decide not to give that money back, and the banks end up not having the money that they need, and they end up having to close their doors. That's, again, the banks closing. Of course, then again, people who had nothing to do with any of that stuff but had their money in those types of banks end up losing their money as well. All right, the Hawley-Smoot tariff, as we don't remember, tariffs are taxes on imported goods, was a way in which a reaction to what had happened in the Depression, saying that if we now put a tariff on all the foreign goods, this will protect the American goods. This will get people in the United States with their money to buy American goods because it'll be way cheaper than foreign goods. And this is going to support our businesses, and this will maybe help out our businesses here in the United States and get us out of kind of the depression or funk that we're in. Of course, the European countries responded with their own tariffs, and really what this did was create the fact that all of the American businesses that were making money on the global market caused them to lose money. And this created bigger issues for them. And so the Hawley-Smoot tariff did the opposite. Instead of helping out the United States businesses, it actually hurt them more than it helped them, because now they lost the people that could purchase goods overseas were now not purchasing from the United States. So in 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected the 32nd President of the United States. He was a former governor of New York. And what he promised was a new deal. He promised a change in the way we're doing things. And remember, Franklin Roosevelt is a Democrat. He is not a Republican. So after a run of Republican presidents that were supporting business and the growth of business, you've got Franklin Roosevelt now, a Democrat, maybe coming on to do things. And we've talked about this before. When the economy is doing bad and you're an elected official, you're most likely going to lose your job. And that's exactly what happens. The Republicans lose the job of presidency, and it becomes a Democratic seat. So what is FDR's New Deal? He's going to put money into public works. He's going to put money into direct federal relief. Now, direct relief is just giving people money. If you have direct relief, the government is going to give you money, and if you have that money in your pocket, you can go buy things. And of course, when you go buy the things that you need, that goes to the businesses that do that, and then those businesses then, of course, get money, and so they can feasibly hire more workers. If they can hire more workers, those people will then have money, and then they will spend it on things. So this is the plan that he has. Public works, again, if you're going to do things, something with the money, you're going to hire people, you're going to do things that are going to be good for everybody. So he's going to put money into roads, into buildings, into other things like that the government might be in charge of. Of course, then hiring people to do those things, puts money in their pocket, they spend the money, and it starts that cycle again. He's going to get old age pensions. There was no retirement or pensions like that. Social Security wasn't a thing at this time. And so what happens is he creates this opportunity for old age pensions, which gets people out of the workplace. The idea was to get the people that were older out of the workplace, out of trying to find jobs, because the government would be paying for basically your retirement. The government then pays for your retirement through this Social Security or old age pension. and then now they won't be looking for jobs. That means the younger people would be able to get the jobs that were out there, that were left. The younger people would be able to get them, and of course make money, get paid, spend the money. And of course old age pensions also gave the elderly people the money in their pocket, and they could go out and spend that as well. He would lower the tariffs, so again the opposite of the Hawley Smoot tariff, get foreign people to hopefully lower their tariffs and foreigners to buy American goods. He would try to get higher farm prices. How do you do that? Well, one of the things they did is they paid farmers not to farm their land. They told them, hey, don't farm your land, which will then reduce the amount of crops that we have. Reducing the amount of crops means reducing the supply. If you reduce the supply and the demand is higher than the supply, the farm prices will go back up. Farmers will make more money by selling less goods. I know it sounds weird, but that's how it happened. Of course, how are they able to do that? The government subsidized them by giving them money. We still do that today. Regulate banks and the stock market. Try to make it so banks and stock market is a little more regulated and honestly done. This way you're not going to have the crash that we had, and we're not going to have this issue with banks closing and honest people losing their money. And finally, he said, we're going to end prohibition. This was a taxable product. This was something that people were doing anyways, even with prohibition in place. People were doing it, and he said, because of that, we should just end it. And this is an opportunity for us to make some money off of it. FDR wins. But he becomes a lame duck president. And because of that, and what that means is that he wins election in November, because his elections are in November. He wins elections in November, but doesn't take office until April of the next year. So he has to wait for months to be able to enact any of his New Deal products. And so people said this is terrible. We shouldn't do things like this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to change this. So after he was in office, the 20th Amendment is put in place, which actually changes the start date of when a president can take office. The Democrats take over Congress, so Republicans not only lost the presidency, but they lost seats in Congress. And with that, the president can now look to get Democrats in Congress to write the bills that he wants, to make the laws that he wants, to be able to do all his things. And of course, he's going to sign them into place. Anything that he might sign or anything he might be asking for isn't going to get rejected like it would if there was a Republican Congress. The Emergency Banking Act he put into place right away. This closed the banks for 4 days. And he said only sound banks are going to reopen. Only banks that actually have money to support their patrons are going to reopen. And the ones that are closed and can't reopen, that is going to be a loss, and he knew people were going to be out there. But at this point in time, what he could guarantee is that if you put your money in the banks, that you would get it back out then. This is a speech by FDR, his inaugural speech. And this is that whole, if you've ever heard, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And that is a part of this speech. And so I'm going to put that video online for you to look at as well. The farmers are given lent money by the government to pay back the banks for what they had taken from them. Again, trying to make the banks more secure as well, and to help the farmers out. The AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which was later ruled unconstitutional, again, was paying farmers not to farm their land. Now, I said that we still did this today, and how could we do that? Well, today it's optional. With the AAA, it was not optional. Farmers were told they could not farm portions of their land. And of course, that would go against our Constitution, saying something you could or could not do with your land there. Then the Dust Bowl hit. Of course, to make things worse, there's all this stuff going on with the Depression and all these other things, and then the Dust Bowl comes on top of that, which makes things even worse. In the 1920s, there was lots of rain. Farm prices were high. And this really equaled overproduction. People were making more. And we talked about how this was even connected to World War I. In the 1930s, though, when it hits, there's a drought. And it goes on for a few years. And because at the time the farmers just weren't aware of how to do this and with the overproduction, they just didn't rotate their crops. And so they farmed the same crops in the same soil over and over and over again. And what ended up happening was the soil couldn't support crops anymore. And the nutrients are taken out of it, and it ended up being this bare soil. And when the dust and when the winds started to pick up and the droughts that were in place, the dust started blowing. And it blew for miles and miles and miles. And it went so far is that you were able to find the dust from the areas in which this was taking place, which would be the southwestern portion of the United States, basically from Oklahoma, Texas, even into up to as far as Nebraska area, Kansas. These are the areas that you're really seeing this stuff happen the most, and you're seeing the dust that's they actually could film. There's a dust film all over Chicago, even as far out as New York City. They could find the dust from the Dust Bowl. It was blowing across the country. So, what other New Deal programs did FDR put in place? You can look here. There's the CCC, the CWA, the FERA. All right, all these different things are in there, and they're more than just acronyms for different programs. All right, each of these programs were different ways in which the FDR was trying to get the government to support or fund different jobs programs or other things that were needed. If there was a problem, there was probably a New Deal program out there to fix it. All right, and some of them were direct relief and some of them were indirect relief. Direct relief, like I said again, was when the government gives you money straight from the government, gives you the money, and then you get to spend it. Indirect relief might be something where they create a job and you go out and do the work, the job for them, and you get paid to work. Okay, they get some, the government gets something out of it, whatever job you've done, but you get the money out of it. All right, so wow, what a deal. This sounds great, right? Well, the stock market gets regulated through the SEC. Unions and workers get stronger because they have something to go against in businesses. Wages and hours are changed. A lot of this has to do with trying to get more people working, right? If we reduce the amount of hours that people can work, this means that if a business wants to stay open 60 hours in a week, they need to hire someone else to be able to work them if you can only work 40. And so I need to fill those other 20 hours. And what happens is a lot of people are splitting jobs. And then, of course, to keep things up, the government starts talking about wages and changing those. So you cannot have these super small wages, all right, but you're going to pay people more. Social Security is put in place. So we talked about like old age pension. And that was thought to be a temporary thing, but it's sticking around and it's still here today. The New Deal was not all that great. There were challengers to the New Deal. Again, obviously, many Republicans would think against this. There were some unconstitutional things that were put in place. And FDR thought that some of these unconstitutional programs, or these programs that were found unconstitutional, was not fair to the American people, that he was doing this to help them, and that if we find these things unconstitutional, then that in this time of emergency, that this wasn't the thing to do. So one of the things that he suggested is that we actually, there was so much stuff going in front of the Supreme Court, he thought, you know what would be better is if we changed it from 9 Supreme Court judges to 15. Now remember, there's one person that gets to suggest who is going to be on the Supreme Court, whether a Supreme Court justice gets to stay in that position until they retire or until they die. Well, of those 9 justices that were in place, FDR didn't get a say in those. And so what he wanted to do is change it to 15, an odd number so that there would never be a tie in votes. But because 15, that would mean 6 new justices would be put on the Supreme Court. And the president of the United States gets to suggest who those justices was. Of course, if that happened, he would be able to name 6 people that would be obviously fair to his ideas, and his things would not be ruled unconstitutional anymore. Luckily, the American people saw through that kind of abuse of power by FDR, let's say, and said no to that, and the Supreme Court still is at 9 justices today. This is also a slow recovery, right? The New Deal was not a speedy thing to fix, but because of the direct relief that was put in place, that slow recovery was received a lot better than it was when, let's say, Hoover was trying to help out businesses, and that would be in a slow recovery that way. In 1937, they cut back on the relief. And there was a minor setback because of it. When they cut down the amount of spending that the government did, people felt that. But by 1938, the worst of it had ended. Ultimately, the Great Depression is more or less over by 1938. We're still in a time of not great prosperity, those kinds of things. However, something's going to happen in 1939 that's really going to end all of this stuff. So what ends the Great Depression? World War II. In September of 1939, Adolf Hitler attacks Poland. The Russians attack Poland, and the United States starts its own to ramp up its business again in making war materials.